Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining another edition of our YouTube Live. My name is Mohith. I'm a developer advocate here at Salesforce. And today we're going to talk about how to implement an OAuth 2.0 JWT Bearer Flow for server-to-server integration between Salesforce and Heroku. Now let me make sure that you can see my screen. So just give me a moment. All right, sorry about that. There was some technical glitch. So again, welcome you all to this session of implementing an OAuth 2.0 JWT Bearer Flow for server-to-server integration between Salesforce and Heroku. A safe harbor here. So, please make sure that you make any, purchasing decision based on anything that is currently available, or not anything that I make here. So with that, let's actually get started today. So today we're going to talk about, again, as I said, we'll talk about JWT. So before I actually get started, I wanted to convey like why I picked this JWT token-based flow and show a use case of how to integrate with Salesforce and Heroku. It's because, a lot of times I've seen you like when we make an application on Heroku, a lot of you prefer using username and password. And just using username and password is not so secure compared to some of the advanced technologies like JWT, that is JSON-based, web-based token flows. So it's important that when you integrate Salesforce with any other environment, and if you're not using like user-to-user authentication using web-based OAuth flow, you use something like JWT to keep it secure. JWT use a combination of public and private key pair in the form of the X509 certificate for signing. That makes it more secure. And also it's very easy to sort of work with JWT in various languages. Today we're going to use Node.js and build a Node.js application on Heroku. So if you're looking for like building an application on Heroku and learning how to build that, then you're in the right session today, because we're going to do that live. So again, most of the languages has support for JSON parsing, Java, JavaScript, you name it. And Node.js has some really interesting and common libraries to parse it. So that's why that makes it ideal for like server-to-server integration flow and to pick one of these flows. And also it is easier to process. Like JWT is very popular. There are a lot of open source libraries and implementations that one could take advantage of to implement this. So with that, what we'll be doing today, right? So we will be actually creating a connected app within Salesforce. So we'll create a connected apps, and then we'll create a Heroku application, specifically Express Node.js application. And we'll try to actually log in into Salesforce using the JWT Bearer Flow. So we're going to implement some Express code and see how we can log in into Salesforce and then get some data from Salesforce. With that, so let's get started and let's keep going. Okay, so let's see if okay, so you all can see my Visual Studio Code, so which is perfect. So we'll start with, so what are the stuffs that we're gonna do? As I said, right, we will create a connected app first in Salesforce. So to create connected app, we'll need something called as digital signature. And we don't need actually digital signature for creating a connected app if you're using a web-based OAuth flow. But for JWT-based flow, you will need to make sure that you have a certificate, like a digital certificate that you can upload to the server, and then you maintain that private key. So using that private key, you decode essentially. So let's get started. Let's see all of these in action. Again, chats are open, so feel free to chat, and I'm gonna monitor the chat. And if you have any questions, comments, just feel free to engage here. All right, so with that, actually, so where should we get started? So the first step, and this I took it from Salesforce DX Developer Guide, because that's, that has really a good documentation around how to create a private key and a self-signed digital certificate, right? So, so we can use something called as OpenSSL to do it. So let's see how we can actually create a digital signed certificate, and then we can use that digital signed certificates to, create a connected app in Salesforce for JWT. So let's get started. So first I'm going to go into my command terminal. So you can see my command terminal, right? So I want to make sure I'm on my desktop, because I want to do, and let me create a directory called, let's call the directory as JWT, and let me cd into the JWT directory. Okay, so the next step here is to make sure that, we generate that private key. So let's generate that, pretty straightforward actually with this command. Again, you need to have OpenSSL, and you can verify that you have OpenSSL by doing something like which OpenSSL, right? So if your machine has OpenSSL, it will show this. And Mac actually has built-in, like you don't have to install anything. But for Windows, you can actually go to OpenSSL website and download and install it. The instructions on the website should be straightforward to install it, and you can verify with which OpenSSL. Okay, so the next step is to actually execute this command, which is the OpenSSL command. And here we need some password actually. I'm gonna just use a password. Again, feel free to use anything. I'm just gonna say Heroku SFTC, and let's just create. So this generated an RSA private key. So we can verify that the private key is generated by actually going to our desktop and looking into this folder. So you should see something like server.pass.key, something like this. Okay. So now using this pass key, actually let's flip over and generate the key. So this is a pass key basically, which is used to, again, we input that pass key and generate that server key, okay, which is essentially a private key. So let's do that. So let's come back here and execute the command again. Again, straightforward instruction. Make sure your password's the same as the previous one to avoid any corruption of the certificate. So again, as you can see, we are inputting the pass key and outputting what we call it as server.key. So now the RSA key is ready. So we go back and look at our desktop. Where is my desktop? Let's look at the server key. Now you can open this with, If you want, you can open this with Sublime Text or any other editor. And it'll say, okay, begin RSA private key and end RSA private key. Okay, so this is the RSA key essentially. Okay, so this looks good. So the next step is essentially, so using that server key, now we're gonna generate the signing certificate, and that's what will give us a certificate signing request, or basically server.csr, which is a certificate signing request, and you can use that certificate signing request to create what we call it as a server certificate. So let's do that. Again, these are all like cryptographic thing. You don't have to like remember, because it's all documented, and anything in OpenSSL, like anytime you want to generate a certificate, these are like some of the common steps that you do. So just go through the steps. Now it's going to ask for a country code, state or the province, and the locality, and the organization name. I'm going to just say Salesforce. Unit name is optional. Common name, again, optional. Email address, might need an email address here. So let's just put my actual email address. Please enter the following to be sent to a challenge password. You need a challenge password. Okay, so it seems like it's ready. Should be ready here. So we should see a server.csr, right? So now we use the CSR to generate what we call the server certificate. Okay, so the next step is essentially generating the server certificate. Again, these are common steps. So this is going to generate the certificate from the private key. So now again, we should go back and look at it. So as you can see, there's a server.cert that is ready. So now we are ready to create the connected application here. Okay, so before that, let's see any other thing on the chat here. So let's go back to our browser and see if there's a chat session somewhere that I can open. Just give me a sec. Okay, so let's see the chat link to see if there is any other chat here. Okay, I'll keep monitoring the chat. All right, so now the next step here is to make sure to create a connected app in Salesforce. So we need a Salesforce environment. So let's see if I have a Salesforce environment. So I created a Salesforce environment last night so that we can, so this is a developer environment. Again, you can essentially sign up for one. Just search for sign up Salesforce developer org. You will sign up for one, or if you're using a Scratch org, that should work as well. Okay, so now the next step is to create that connected app. So how do we do that? So we go to apps and we go to the app manager. And in the app manager, we say new connected app, and let's call it as Heroku App. API name is Heroku App. It requires a contact email. It doesn't require a phone. So you can provide that. And this is very important. So we have to turn the enable OAuth setting. Now callback URL is needed only for web-based OAuth flow. So for JWT flow, you don't need the callback URL. So you can just put something for time being. So for example, I can say localhost 8080 callback for now, because it won't allow us to save without that. So that's why. Now, very important is the scopes. So we need, probably, it depends on what authorizations your app actually needs, or what data that your app actually needs from Salesforce. So you can provide some scopes. I can provide full access. What else? Manage your data. Let's say refresh tokens. Yeah, this should be enough for time being. And then we basically save. So it's going to take 2 to 10 minutes to actually make these keys active, like the consumer key and so notice that a consumer key is created and a consumer secret, and we'll be actually using these to sort of authenticate here. Okay. So this is all the setup that is required on the Salesforce end. Pretty straightforward. You need to generate that key, right? The digital certificate key. Did we upload the digital certificate key? I don't see this key. Okay, let's upload one. So use digital signature. Let's choose JWT, and it should be that server certificate, server.cert. Okay, so you open that and actually save it, and it should. Yeah, so pretty straightforward. Don't forget to upload the digital certificate, and then your OAuth scopes essentially, and then the callback URL is mandatory, although for JWT, as I said, we don't use it. And then the consumer key and the consumer secret will use it for the purpose. Okay, so this is all the thing. It's all done on our end, right? Let's see, maybe I'm on the wrong chat URL. So let me make sure that I'm on the right chat URL here, so that make sure that I can see your chat. So let's see. Yep, I'm on live. I can see there are folks watching me. Okay, so now let's actually make sure that I have access to the chat. Okay, no worries. Let's move on. Okay, so the next step here is the creation of that Heroku application. So let's get started with Heroku application. So to create the Heroku application, right, again, I'm gonna go back into. Now there's one more steps we can do. We can make sure that the key is like the key that we have here, like the private key that we have, the server key that we have, is is of the RSA format. So for that, maybe I need one more step here called RSA, and then server.key, and then it will out server.key, just to make sure it is in the RSA format. So you should see an RSA format key here. Okay, so we have the key. Okay, so everything looks good on Salesforce and on the third side. So let's actually now move on to our next step, which is creation of the Heroku application. So to create the Heroku application, let's actually go through the steps, right? So let's move on to. Okay, so let me clear and let's actually get out of this. Let's move on to a project directory called projects, probably. Oh, okay. Okay, there you go. Oops, did I do something wrong here? Sorry. cd into desktop / projects. Okay. So here I'm gonna create a directory called, let's call it as Heroku App, probably Heroku App. Let's cd into the directory, and then let's actually create a Heroku application there. Let me open that directory in the VS Code. So now let's go to terminal. And here I'm gonna create a Heroku app. So Heroku again has this CLI. Let me actually bump my font so that you guys can easily follow me. So Heroku also has this help, right? So it uses Oakleaf, and you can actually do a help on every commands that they provide. So one of the commands that we're gonna use is called Heroku, and then apps create, and the application name. Let's try with sfjwt app and see if the app is available. There you go. So our app is actually created. We can actually go look at this application here on Heroku. There you go. So the Heroku application is created. Now we need to code this application, right? Or create the application code. All right, so to create the application code, right, we need to, so I'm going to create a node project. Okay, so I'm going to create a node project, so I can start with a simple npm init. Basically, let's do this npm init, package name, just let's keep the standard stuff going here. Okay, there we go. So I should see a package.json. So let's create a file called index.js where we will do the coding. Okay, so now what are some of the the common libraries that I need for my application? Okay, so on Node, right, to create a server, right, there is a very popular library, Express, actually. So you can read more about Express by just going to just say Express Node, and it will give you the website. And it is one of the most popular web framework for Node.js applications. So we're gonna use that actually. So we'll install that. So you can say npm install express save. So it's gonna install. The next step is to install another Node library called Helmet. Okay, so just search for Helmet Node, and it will say Helmet, and it will tell you what Helmet does, right? So Helmet actually helps you to secure your Express application by automatically setting your HTTP headers, right? So you can set it yourself, but this actually makes it really easy to set it up. So we need Helmet. So let's actually install Helmet as well. So there you go. So we have the Helmet. So you can see all of this getting added in your package.json dependencies, right? And there is one other library that is very, very common when you're working with Express app. It's called compression Node.js Express, right? So compression is again a middleware. So it's a compression middleware, right? So essentially, what it does is, it will attempt to compress your response body, so based on the given option, so that we can reduce the size of the payload that is going outside. Yeah, so let's actually get this as well, because we want to definitely keep our application sort of really compressed or fast. Okay, so we have all of these, right? Now there's one more popular library, because we're going to work with Salesforce APIs, JSForce. Okay, so go to JSForce npm. It's one of the popular library, like Node library, to connect with Salesforce data. So again, it provides already the flow for flow for OAuth based or web based OAuth flow. But today we're going to do JWT. But we can still use this library to do other parts of the code, like for example, querying or accessing REST API or bulk API or chatter API or whatnot, right? Tooling API, etc. All of the APIs of Salesforce, basically, most of them you can use this for. So this library is very powerful again, but it doesn't provide like JWT use case. So for JWT, we will add one more library, and I'll talk about that. But for now, let's just add npm install JSForce. So let's do npm install JSForce, save. That's gonna install, done. Okay, so the next step is to install a library, which again, an open source library. So if you go to Salesforce, like search for Salesforce JWT authentication, okay, and if you search for Salesforce JWT authentication, you'll come across this help article, and this help article basically tells you like the use cases for JWT, how to get started, how to actually work. Like you will have to create an issuer, subject, audience, and an expiration and base 64 encode, and then you encode the header and the claim set, and then you create this, right? So there are a bunch of steps that are required to do this JWT. And that's where I was trying to like create something, but then I found some open source library, and the library was called SF JWT token npm. So this library already did what I wanted to do in Node. So I was like, okay, then let's just use this library for our use case, and we don't want to, we definitely don't want to, basically reinvest the same time. So this was a pretty nice library I found. Really, the code was open source. And yeah, this was a really good library actually, because I think it uses TypeScript as well, and it has all the stuff, and very easy to actually use. So really handy Node library. But if you want to create something like this, it's not difficult. You just have to follow the docs of Salesforce and a little bit of Node to create it. But for now, I'm gonna just use this. So let's just install one. Let's install one. All right, so now we have all of the dependencies that we need. So we should be good to actually work here. Now, the other thing that I want to actually add it up here is to make sure that we provide a start command. So it should actually do a node on the index.js file. Okay, so this is how you start a node or kick off your node main program. Or coming from Java world, I'm always like main program, but this is how you kick off the initial file. So let's go back and let's code now. So we need to code. We need to code an application essentially which connects to Salesforce. So the moment I launch the application, it'll start the OAuth flow, the JWT OAuth flow, and then it will connect to Salesforce. So we have half an hour left. Let me see if there are any chats. I think I have a wrong URL today for chats. I apologize. I'm gonna find on my phone to see if I can get to those chats. But feel free to comment on the video once the video will be online, and I'll respond to you there. Let me see if I can find the chats. Give me a sec. Yeah. One sec. Okay, it seems like I have to log into the YouTube to get the chats or view those chats. All right, no worries. So let's actually keep going. So the next step here is to make sure we start coding, right? So the first thing that I want to do is make sure I have the express. So I'm going to use common JS module, like use the common JS with require. Now you can also use ES6 imports as well, as Node is actually supporting it. But let's just use common JS for today. Okay, so we have express, and then what else do we need? So we need that helmet, right? So helmet, let's do a require on helmet. And then we said we also have the compression. So let's do a require on the compression library. If you do like this, it will automatically give you. And then what else? So we have a JS force. Let's require JS force. Sorry, it's okay. So let's do a require on JS force. And then what else? So we have this new library which has a method called get token, default method basically, and say require what is the thing that we want? Say SF JWT token. There you go. Okay, so we have all of these. We finished with the require statements, right? Now let's instantiate that Express app. So we say app Express, and then app.use helmet, and then the next step is app.use compression. So you can find more about what is app.use by just going to Express Node.js docs, right? They will give you the APIs. So getting started guide, right? API references. So we are using, I think, what version did we import by default? It should be the latest table. So we're using 4.1.7, right? So express.use. Where is the express.use here? This is 4x, right? Let's use Google. So it's basically a middleware. If you want to add a middleware, so bind application level middleware to an app object using app.use. Yep. Yeah, so it's a middleware system that you can add. Okay, so what else do we have? So we have this Express. Okay, so the next step is obviously, making sure that this has a host and a port, right? Or making sure that it runs on a port. Let's just instantiate the connection object here. So we can say const connection. So we can use the JSForce connection. So we can say JSForce dot. You see they have a connection object, and we say JSForce dot connect. Okay. So now the next step is to make sure that we provide we listen for a port just to log, and this is for log. Make sure we are listening on the port, and then it's an anonymous callback function, right? And we say console.log, and we say we are actually listening on, or basically say, I can say server started on. We can use a bit of host. We can say it started on host on port. So on port, and we can use port. Okay, sorry, port. Okay, so we need this host and the port, and there is very easy way to get that actually. So we can use const and say host equals, we can say, so when a node process run, there is a object called process.env, and that from there you can actually get the value of host and also the port. Again, this is just for logging. There's not a lot of functionality here. Port. Okay, so the next step here is to make sure that we provide a route, like the default route, right? So whenever there is a URL, so app.get here means, when essentially what it means is whenever the Heroku is like sort of instantiated, or when you're on the actual domain, we call a function basically. So we can make that function async. It will have two things, request and a response, and again It has a request and a response, and it's an async function, right? So what we can do here is we can actually use the the get token of the SFJWT token. Let's see how to use that actually. Let's come back here. So this one, right? So all that you need to get connected with this library is pretty simple. So you need this get token, and the token requires your client ID from the connected app, your username, and your audience. So now audience here is probably I think the audience here will be the login URL of the Salesforce environment, which will be login.salesforce.com. Or maybe it's the instance here. No, it's the login.salesforce.com, and then the private key. So the private key is something that we already have. So let's get started. Let's just add this bunch of code here. So we come back here. Now, it's always best practice to use try and catch in case anything goes wrong. We can, we can basically look for that error, right? So I can console.log so that I see it in my logs. Now it's always, if you're building something enterprise specific, make sure to have a logging library in place. Okay. And then now what I need is, so there is this response.json where what we can do is we can simply send a JSON response. So we can stringify this stuff and send it back. I don't think this is the best practice here, but just for our logging purposes, we can send it on the response itself. So we see it on the output. Okay, so now we have to copy this thing, right? So this is what, so here, right? So issuer will be the client ID, right? So again, we can store all of these securely in the environment. So I'm gonna change this to JWT response or token response. And issuer here, again, we can change all of these to make sure it comes from the environment. So I can say environment and say client ID. What about the subject? So the subject is the username. Again, the username can go into the environment variable. Again, because we are using one, remember it's a server to server integration, right? That means one user is actually used to authenticate. So we use process.env, and the audience is, as I said, it should be login.salesforce.com, but let's just create a variable here. And the private key, again, is something that we can actually provide from the environment variable. So we can call it as private key. Okay, so fantastic. So what have we got? So we got this. So let's actually, sort of use this to initialize our connection, which is this object, right? So we can say connection dot initialize. It should actually auto suggest me. No worries. So yeah, we can write connection dot initialize. There's a function called connection dot initialize where you can initialize a connection object, right? So they have something called as instance URL. So you can find more about it in the JSForce documentation. So just say JSForce connection object. So JSForce has this connection object. Do they show you? Yeah, so you can either use client ID and redirect URL. This is for the browser, right? Or if you're using like an access token, you can just use instance URL and access token. So we will get these. So let's just use the access token. So we will get this instance URL from this one. So we can say dot instance URL. And then, sorry, this need not be, I think it's comma. So this one should be access token. Also, this needs to go like this. Okay. All right, perfect. So we have initialized it. Now we can do some fun stuff here. Like we can say connection dot query. Why is my JS for stuff like sort? It should auto suggest me some methods, but looks like it's not. So no worries. So, it should be pretty straightforward. So we can just make sure that we are fetching all the accounts here. We can say accounts, and then make sure that you await, and then connection.query. That's the way to query your info. So we can even put it in. Let's just execute a simple query here. ID, name from account, limit maybe 20 for time being, and then let's just respond with all the accounts. Okay, so we've got a code that should work, but we'll see. So yeah, so as you saw, whenever there's a URL hit with a slash, right, it will essentially get the environment variables in the Heroku, and then initialize the connection object of the JS force, and then respond. So now to get it working, right, let's deploy to Heroku. Now, if you are actually locally testing this, you can by using a library called .env library node, right? So it provides a way to like read a .env file from your, so you can create like a .env file, and then have all these variables there and locally sort of execute, but make sure that don't commit anything like these client ID and login URL. Of course, not login URL. The client ID and the private keys are secure. Okay, so that means make sure that you securely store them and do not put it on your client-side code or anything like that. This has to come from server. And this code that we have written, note that this is not a client-side code. It is running on Node.js server. So everything has to be on the server. Never expose these things on the client side. Those are some of the best practices for security. So with that being said, right, so actually let's see how we have to deploy this now to Heroku. So let's actually try deploying this to Heroku. So I'm already logged into the Heroku environment. So you can see, like, if I go to my dashboard, I'm logged in, right? So I'm also logged in from my command line. That's why I was able to create. But if you have not logged in, just type Heroku login. It'll let you log in. And Heroku is also free, right? So I mean, free for experimentation, and there are some things that are free. So you can sign up for one, like you can sign up for a Heroku environment. So the next thing I want to make sure is also have a git ignore file here. So .git ignore, so we don't push all the node modules. And then we also need to make sure that this is a Git repo. So I'm going to say git init. So it initializes the empty Git repo. And the next step is to add all the stuff, right? And then commit to that. So we say commit and say first Heroku app with Salesforce or with SFTC JWT. Okay, so now make sure to say Heroku git remote. So this is to make sure that the git remote that is there points to our application. So what was our application when I created the Heroku application, right? What was the name of the application? Okay, so it was SF JWT app. So we can do a git remote. So now the remote is set for the git. Now we can do this. Also, let's check out the main branch because Heroku now points to the main branch. So we switch to the main branch. Now we say git push Heroku main. That's how you deploy an application on Heroku. So this should kick the deployment. It should make sure to use the build pack. It should automatically detect that it's a Node project. So it's installing all the dependencies and all the Node modules. So yeah, so let's see. Okay, so it seems like everything went fine. There's some file which is unsaved. Okay, so this was not saved. Let me make sure that we have the file. Let's do once more. Okay, seems like everything is up to date. Oh, there was only one. Sorry, there was only one blank that was added, so no big deal. Okay, so now at this point, right, let's actually go to Heroku. Let's go to Heroku. So I see my application. That's nice. And then I need the settings. So let's actually add those config var, right? So let's configure that. So we need client ID. So what the value of the client ID should be from this one. So we copy the consumer key. That's the client ID. Add. The next step is we need the key. The next key is we need the username. So it has to be the username of my org. So let's get back to my username. What's my username? This one. Very important that these variables are correct, otherwise we'll not get the expected outcome. So the next step after the client ID client, what else did we need? Okay, we need the login URL. We know this should be https:/login.salesforce.com. Now, if you're using a Scratch org, this can be test.salesforce.com. The next step is, what's the next step? The private key. So we add the private key. Now the private key should be the one that we have here in this folder, because we use this key to create that cert. So this is how the trust is getting established, right, between the environments. So we come back here, we go to Sublime Text Open. So let's just copy and make sure that it's here. Make sure no blank spaces. Add. Boom. There we go. Okay, so all of the environment variables are there. So we should see something working or something not working. We have 10 more minutes. So let's see if your application is like working or not. So we open the app. Oh, there's a bug. There's an issue. So let's actually find out what has failed in our live code. Oh, this dot initialize is not a function. Okay, it's a type error. Okay, that's why I love the local development, because we could have caught this. So connection dot. Okay, okay, let's see. What am I missing here? Oh, you know what? I know why this happened. So we need a new here. We need to instantiate by a new function. And that is the reason why I was sort of not getting my, there you go. You see? So that is why I was not able to autocomplete. Okay. So that should be it. So let's actually, okay. So let's actually commit. So let's do the git commit, fix typo, and then let's do a push. Okay, sounds good. Let's see if this was the cause for it. Okay. So build succeeded. It's compressing. Let's see. All right, so now we should see something. Internal server error. Why is it so? Maybe the server is not up again. One sec. Let's tail the logs and see what's going on here. Okay, so it appears that you have something like where it should be. Oh, right. There you go. My bad. Okay, my bad. Lots of errors this morning. Okay, and the compression should also be that. Okay, one more go. All right. Again, as I said, like, I wanted to push to the Heroku. That's why I did this way. But make sure that you actually use a local environment to actually build your code before you sort of push to Heroku. And don't be like me, just trying to push to the actual environment before you actually test your code. But yeah, those typos can be easily caught if you try to debug your code locally first. So all I needed was some more work to put an environment variable and configure all of these from that. Okay, so we should be seeing something here. Something is happening. Okay, user hasn't approved this consumer. Okay, this is good. Okay, so yeah, so user hasn't approved because one of the things that you need to do in the JWT flow, and that's very, very important, is to configure that connected app. So let's configure. So we go to connected apps. So go to manage connected apps. And this is one of the common mistakes that happens is like, so when you say all users may self-authorize, right? What happens is somebody has to go through a WebAuth flow for you. So very important that, if you do not want, and if you want to pre-authorize, select admin approved users are pre-authorized and add your profile or the permission set. In this case, I'm just going to add my system admin profile. So it's very, very important. Okay. So now I think it should all be set. So let's see what happens now. So now, there you go, beautiful. So we see all the 13 accounts that were there in my system, right? So we have established a JWT connection essentially between Salesforce and Heroku. So let's recap a bit of what we did. There are a lot of steps that we took, and we have like 2 minutes to recap. So let's recap all the work that we did here, right? So the first step that we did was to make sure that we followed an instruction set from Salesforce documentation, which is you can find it on the Salesforce DX developer guide. So it highlights how to use OpenSSL to create a server key and a self-signing certificate. So it creates a self-signing certificate and a server key. Now you create a connected app within Salesforce. So let me go to connected app. So I go to the connected app here, right? So I created a connected app and provided that digital certificate to it. So let's go back to the connected app, or let's go back to the apps. Okay, so I went to the apps and then I went to this Heroku app. I created a connected app, and make sure that in the connected app, you provide the digital certificate and provide the right scopes. Also make sure that this connected app is set to admin approved users are pre-authorized. That you can do it in the policies. That is, you come back to your manage connected apps and then edit the policy and make sure that all admin approved users are pre-authorized. Okay, and then add the profile or the permission set of the user so that you don't have to go through the OAuth flow to provide an access. Okay, so once you do all of that, right, we come back and created a simple Heroku application to connect to that. Now, the way we did is we used Express Server. We used a library called SFJWT token, which provides a simple utility method called getToken. So this application essentially instantiates this JWT token response. And once you have that, you can initialize your connection with the access token. So once you have that, you pretty much can just use that connection object to do anything that you want. You can query any data set in Salesforce, or you can access any of the Salesforce APIs, including metadata API, tooling API, and so forth. Now, one thing we did not do was we did not create a web interface for it. It's all running behind the scenes in the Node application. And one important thing to note is never put your access token or any secure information like private key on your client-side JavaScript. That's definitely a no-no. Make sure that the private key is securely stored using environment variable, or if you're using in any file system, make sure that it's encrypted. If you're putting into the database, again, make sure that it's encrypted and protected. And then essentially from there, what we did is we use this. So now you can really cache these tokens inside your code and pretty much read any data from Salesforce. Again, advantages of using a Heroku application, is it can scale well because the runtime is elastic. So you can scale as per your CPU needs. Okay. All right. So with that, I think I'm at the end of my conversation here. Let's just go back to our slides and just complete. So again, one thing to note is feel free to connect with us on developer.salesforce.com or tweet us on @SalesforceDevs or catch on our YouTube channel. Please do subscribe so that you get the notifications, and also reach out to me on Twitter if you have any feedback about this work that we did or about this whole demo application that we built today. With that, thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful day or evening, or depending on the time zone you are. Thank you so much. See you next time.